So Carole Middleton just gave her first major interview in 22 years, at 70 years old. And the first thing she did, the very first thing, was name Queen Camilla. And honestly, the palace has not figured out how to respond yet. Because here's what makes this different from every other royal story that's blown up in the last few years. This isn't a leaked text message. It's not an anonymous source with unclear motives. It's not Harry dropping another chapter in a memoir. This is a 70-year-old woman who spent 2 decades saying absolutely nothing through 2 royal weddings, 3 royal births, a global pandemic, and a breast cancer diagnosis, who sat down, looked at the camera, and decided that today was the day she finally said it out loud. And what she said has genuinely broken something open that the palace is not going to be able to close again. Before we get into all of it, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss updates as this story keeps developing. There is genuinely a lot more to this. Alright, so let's start with what actually happened, because the way this thing landed, and the reason it hit so hard, isn't just about what she said. It's about who she is, and how long she's been waiting to say it. March the 14th, 2025. Hello, magazine. Carole Middleton, seated at a table in her Berkshire home, looking completely composed. 11 pages. By 9 the following morning, it is the most read article in the magazine's 38-year history. Not a leak. Not a PR-managed statement filtered through 3 palace advisors. A woman who made a decision, sat down, and said it on the record. And here's the part that actually gets crazy, because what she said wasn't nasty. It wasn't petty. She didn't storm in swinging. She described a pattern of pointed remarks, of quiet dismissals, of a persistent, low-level sense that Kate and her family had always been viewed as outsiders who had somehow slipped through the gates. And then the line that basically detonated everything she said, that when it came to her grandchildren's upbringing, she would always put William and Kate's wishes first. Not the institutions. Not anyone else's. 2 words. Anyone else's. And every single person who read that knew exactly who she was talking about. Within 4 hours, the story is on every major British news channel. Royal commentators are being pulled into studios. Hashtags are trending globally. And somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, a very specific conversation is happening about damage control. The palace has not released a statement, which in royal world basically means the hit landed exactly where it was aimed. So the question, the one that makes this impossible to just scroll past, is why now? Why at 70? What actually happened that made a woman who had kept her mouth shut through everything finally decide that today was the day? And what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. To understand why this interview hit the way it did, you have to understand who Carole Middleton actually is. Not the version the tabloids invented. Not the pushy social climber with the scheming eyes at royal events. The actual picture. Carole grew up solidly middle class. She worked as a British Airways flight attendant. She married Michael Middleton, and together they built a business called Party Pieces from scratch, a home party supply company that, at its peak, was valued at approximately £30 million. She didn't inherit access to power. She didn't marry into it. She built it. And there is a meaningful difference between those 2 things that the people who dismissed her never quite understood. And here's the thing you need to understand about how she built it, because this is where it gets interesting. She didn't just build a business. She built a path. Street, Andrews School in Pangbourne, then Marlborough College, where annual fees run around £42,000. Then Street, Andrews University in Scotland, where, oh, look, Prince William just happened to be studying art history at exactly the same time. Now, was that a coincidence? The British press debated it for years. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that Carole understood something fundamental about how power works in Britain. It is not about money. It is about proximity, being in the right room, at the right moment, with the right person. And she got her daughter into exactly that position at exactly the right time. But here's what most people skip over. Once Kate married William in April 2011, Carole didn't step back. She stepped carefully. She became the one constant in Kate's life who was not bound by palace protocol. She could show up at the house without a lady-in-waiting in the room. She could give Kate actual advice without it being filtered through 3 layers of courtiers first. She could bake with the grandchildren in a normal kitchen, and nobody could stop her. She was the one person inside Kate's inner circle who was not also inside the institution's control. And that specific thing is what made her genuinely dangerous. Think about what that actually means for a second. The palace has a whole system for managing the people around senior royals. You can promote someone. You can pull their access. You can quietly freeze them out by making sure their calls stop getting returned. The institution has been doing this for decades. It is actually very good at it. But Carole Middleton didn't need anything from the palace. She had no title to protect, no position to lose, no royal income that could be cut. She was immune to every tool the system normally uses to bring people into line. To Camilla, to the old guard, to anyone who believed the monarchy should be a closed system that controls its own people. Carole Middleton represented something they had genuinely never had to deal with before, an outsider with real influence who could not be managed, and Camilla had been noticing for years, and had a very specific plan for what to do about it. But what Camilla was preparing to do next changed everything. But to truly understand why Carole Middleton could do what she did, why she sat down for that interview without flinching, without hedging, without a single moment of visible hesitation, you have to go back, further than most people realize. September the 6th, 1997. Diana's funeral. Carole Middleton was 42 years old. Kate was 15, and like pretty much the entire country, they watched the coffin move through the streets of London. But here's what's interesting, and this is the part that most people skip over entirely. Carole wasn't just grieving, she was watching, paying close attention to something very specific. Not the flowers on the coffin, not the crowds, the institution's response to all of it. The way the palace had initially refused to lower the flag. The way Diana had spent her final years being quietly, systematically cut off from the people who supported her. The way a woman the entire world adored had been ground down, isolated, and ultimately broken by the very family she had married into. And when it was over, the institution just kept going, like nothing had happened. Like the most beloved royal in modern history hadn't just been destroyed from the inside out. Carole saw all of that, and she understood the pattern. Because here's the thing about Diana, and honestly, this is the part that actually turns the stomach a little. She wasn't brought down by one dramatic moment. It was gradual. It was quiet. First, they removed the allies. Then they managed the access. Then they made her dependent on a system that had already decided she was a problem. By the time she understood what was happening, it was too late to reverse it. Carole made a decision that day. She never said it out loud. Not for 22 years. But from the moment Kate became a serious contender to marry William, that decision governed everything Carole did. Her daughter would never be isolated. Kate would always have one person in her inner circle who was loyal to Kate first, and to the institution never. Not a courtier. Not a palace-approved advisor. Her mother, physically present, permanently available, completely outside the system's reach. And then by 2012, just 1 year into Kate's marriage, the comparisons started. Kate and Diana. Everywhere. Same warmth. Same instinct for making ordinary people feel genuinely seen. Same ability to walk into a room of 300 strangers and make every single one of them feel like the most important person there. And Carole, watching from just behind the cameras at engagement after engagement, started to feel something she hadn't expected to feel so soon. Recognition. She had watched this exact dynamic before, and she knew how the institution responded to it. There's a conversation that a close family friend reportedly described winter of 2013, Carole's home in Bucklebury, after a royal tour that had left Kate visibly drained. Too many restrictions, not enough of the warmth that came naturally to her. And Carole's words, as they were reported, "You don't let them change you. You let them think they're changing you. There's a difference." That sentence. That is the entire story in 11 words. And Camilla had been building towards something for years, and she was closer to pulling it off than anyone knew. So here's what Camilla actually wanted. And this is the detail that stopped me cold when I first read it, because it's not what most people assumed. It wasn't friendship with Carole. It wasn't a warmer relationship with Kate. It wasn't the kind of blended family harmony that makes for a nice Christmas card photo. What she wanted was a formally recognized advisory role in the upbringing of George, Charlotte, and Louis. An official say, not just a step-grandmother's occasional opinion in how the future heirs to the throne were being raised and prepared for their responsibilities. And her argument, made privately to Charles across multiple conversations, was actually pretty logical when you lay it out. The future heirs needed to understand aristocratic tradition from the earliest possible age. They needed exposure to the circles they would one day move in. They needed guidance from someone who understood the weight of the crown from the inside. And who better to provide that than their step-grandmother, the future Queen of England herself? Like, when you put it that way, it almost sounds reasonable. That's what makes it so effective. The lobbying campaign ran from roughly 2022 to 2024, beginning about 6 months after Queen Elizabeth died, when Charles was king and Camilla had more direct access to him than at any previous point in their entire marriage. She made this case repeatedly. She framed it as concern for the children, as duty, as doing what was right for the institution. And Charles, who had always, his entire adult life, struggled to say a firm no to Camilla, listened, and according to sources close to the king, he came very close to agreeing. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because while Camilla was quietly lobbying for influence over the future heirs, her sister Annabelle Elliot was building something else entirely. Annabelle's interior design firm had received contracts at 3 separate royal residences since 2016: Highgrove, Clarence House, and a significant restoration project at Birk Hall in Scotland. The total value of those contracts came to approximately £4.2 million. Now the work was legitimate. Nobody is saying otherwise, but when you put it next to Camilla's push for a formal role with the grandchildren, the picture starts to look a lot less like a family and a lot more like a network, quietly consolidating its position inside the institution while the previous generation of gatekeepers was gone. And honestly, that's the part that changed everything. Because it meant this wasn't just about grandchildren. It was about money and influence, and a family extending its reach into the monarchy in ways that had nothing to do with service or duty. Then, in November 2024, Charles had a private memorandum drafted, not a formal royal decree, not a public announcement, a letter of intent, essentially a document that said yes to the whole thing. It was never signed, but it got close enough to completion that 2 of William's private advisors found out it existed, and one of them told William the plan was staggering in its ambition, and she was one step away from pulling it off. When William found out about the memorandum, he didn't storm into his father's office. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't leak anything to the press. He did what he always does when he is genuinely, deeply angry about something. He went quiet. 6 weeks of quiet. 6 weeks of asking specific questions to specific people in private, confirming the memorandum existed, understanding its legal status, the difference between a letter of intent and a formal royal decree, whether it was binding, whether it could be acted on without his knowledge. 6 weeks of building a complete picture before saying a single word to anyone outside that immediate circle. Not even to Kate. And then came January the 9th, 2025, a routine family gathering at Sandringham. The kind of informal session the family uses to coordinate the royal calendar for the year ahead. Carole was present. She occasionally joined these meetings when the agenda touched on the grandchildren's schedules. Standard stuff. Nothing that should have changed anything, and then Camilla raised it. Not the memorandum she didn't know yet that William knew it existed, but the underlying argument. The case she had been making privately to Charles for 2 years. She said it clearly, in a room full of people, without apparent hesitation that as the future queen, she believed she should have a formally recognized role in guiding the Wales children's understanding of their royal responsibilities. Okay, so here's the part that actually changes everything, because here is what Carole saw in that room in real time. Camilla makes the statement. And King Charles, the man who had been shown a draft memorandum on this exact subject 2 months earlier, the man who had come within one signature of agreeing to the whole thing, says nothing. He doesn't correct her. He doesn't distance himself from the proposal. He looks at the table. And in that moment, Carole understood something she hadn't fully understood before. Charles had known. He had been seriously considering it. And he had chosen not to tell his son, not to tell his daughter-in-law. He had sat with this for 2 months and said nothing to either of them. That is not a husband being pressured by his wife. That is a king making a choice. And this time, for the first time in 22 years, Carole did not stay quiet. She addressed Camilla directly, calmly, no raised voice, no drama. She said that William and Kate had made their position on the children's upbringing completely clear, and that position did not include a formal advisory role for anyone outside the immediate family. And then she raised Annabelle Elliot, not as an accusation, as a question. A specific, precise, impossible to ignore question about whether the privileges being extended to Camilla's family were genuinely in line with the monarchy's stated values of service and duty. The room went very quiet, and within 72 hours, the story had leaked to the press. But what Carole did next, the move she had actually been preparing, that's the part nobody saw coming. After the Sandringham meeting, Carole gave herself 6 weeks. Not 6 weeks of panic. Not 6 weeks of calling lawyers or drafting statements or leaking things anonymously to journalists she trusted. 6 weeks of complete, deliberate silence. Because here's the thing about Carole Middleton that people have consistently underestimated: she has never once moved before she was ready. And she was not going to start now. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about what she was willing to have on permanent record. And just as importantly, she thought about what she was not going to say, because in a move like this, what you leave out is honestly just as powerful as what you put in. Then, when she was absolutely certain, she made one phone call to Hello magazine. And that decision, that specific choice of platform, is actually where the strategic genius of this whole thing lives. Because think about it. She didn't go to Tatler. She didn't go to the Times. She didn't sit down for a primetime television interview where a journalist could push back, reframe her words, or make it look like a political attack. She chose Hello, the magazine that covered Kate's engagement announcement, the magazine that ran the first official photographs of Princess Charlotte, the magazine that ordinary British families, not royal correspondents, not political journalists, not palace insiders actually read on a Sunday afternoon. By choosing Hello, Carole sent a signal before she had said a single word. This is not a political operation. This is a grandmother, speaking, in her kitchen, over tea, and you genuinely cannot argue with a grandmother in Hello magazine without immediately making yourself look like the problem. Now here's what makes this even more significant, because what she actually said in that interview was, legally speaking, completely clean. She never named Camilla directly. She never made a specific accusation that could be challenged or actioned. She described patterns. She talked about values. She said what it means to put children first, to believe that family loyalty matters more than institutional hierarchy, to prioritize warmth over tradition. Every single sentence was defensible, and every single sentence was devastating. Because every person who read it, including every person inside the palace, knew exactly who she was describing and exactly what she was talking about. And here's where it gets kind of brilliant when you actually think it through. Once that piece was published, once it was the most read article in Hello's 38-year history by 9 the following morning, Camilla's team had basically three options: fight back directly and look defensive, which confirms the remarks were aimed at her, stay silent and look like an admission, or give their own interview, which just pulls even more attention back to the original. Every option available made things worse. And Carole knew that before she ever sat down. That is not someone who lost her temper at a family meeting and decided to go rogue. That is someone who had been thinking about this move for a very long time, who understood exactly how the institution operated, and who built something it simply could not dismantle. But the thing that actually told the whole story wasn't the words she used. It was a single photograph. And what that photograph was communicating, once you understand it, you genuinely cannot unsee. The photograph ran on the front page of 11 national publications the morning the magazine hit newsstands. And honestly, before we even get to what Carole said, before a single word of that interview gets discussed, that photograph alone told the entire story to anyone paying close enough attention. Let me describe it to you, because the details matter here. Carole Middleton, 70 years old, seated at a round table in her Berkshire home. Not a palace, not a hotel lobby, not a carefully lit studio with a neutral backdrop chosen by a PR team. Her home, her table, her china, natural light coming through the window, soft and unhurried. The styling is precise in a way that looks effortless, which is always the hardest thing to pull off. A deep navy wrap dress, pearl earrings, one pair, small, her wedding ring, nothing else. Both hands wrapped around a cup of tea, posture perfect. And the expression, this is the part that got people warm but completely unreadable. She is not smiling, she is not performing triumph or vulnerability or righteous anger. She is just there, like someone who has waited a very long time for a particular moment and is in absolutely no rush now that it has finally arrived. Now here's the thing. Nobody announced anything. Nobody made a statement. There was no palace briefing, no coordinated message, no spokesperson explaining what this image was supposed to communicate, and yet the message was completely clear. To anyone who understood the language, the navy dress first, that is Kate's color. More than any other shade in the last 5 years, deep navy is the color most associated with the Princess of Wales at public engagements. Carole wearing it in her first major interview in 22 years is not a coincidence. It is a flag. It is her saying, without a single word, whose side of this table she is sitting on. The minimal jewelry, no statement pieces, nothing borrowed from the royal collection, nothing that signals proximity to the institution. Just her wedding ring, just herself. The setting, her ground, her terms. The palace backdrop is gone. The protocol is gone. The courtiers are gone. It is just Carole. And that simplicity is the entire statement. To an outsider, that might look like just a nice photograph of a grandmother having tea in her kitchen. But in the context of everything that had happened in the previous 6 weeks, that image was a declaration. And everyone who needed to understand it understood it immediately. Kate reportedly saw the magazine at her Windsor home that morning. The call to her mother lasted 47 minutes. William looked at the photograph for a long time before saying anything. According to a source close to the family, what he eventually said was 3 words. She looks like herself. 3 words. But after years of watching his mother-in-law smile politely at events where she was being quietly dismissed, 3 words that meant everything. Camilla reportedly saw the image the same morning the magazine hit newsstands. Her response, according to a palace aide, was to ask for her calendar to be cleared for the rest of the day. And within 48 hours, her team had launched a full damage control operation, which is when the whole strategy fell apart. Within 48 hours of the hello piece, Camilla's team had placed 3 separate briefings in friendly royal media outlets. The messaging was consistent across all 3. Carole was speaking out of turn. Her remarks were not representative of the family's actual dynamics. The palace was united. Anonymous sources described her as well-intentioned but overstepping. Royal commentators who regularly receive palace access were quickly appearing on television, describing the story as exaggerated, lacking context, the kind of thing that happens when someone outside the institution misunderstands how it works. It was a well-organized operation, professionally executed. The kind of thing that had worked before, multiple times, on stories with far more explosive source material than this one. And it failed. Completely. Almost immediately. Because here's the thing, and this is actually where the strategy fell apart at the most fundamental level. Unlike every previous royal scandal that needed managing, this one had a face. Carole Middleton was not an anonymous source with unclear motives. She was not a disgruntled former aide settling a personal score. She was the Princess of Wales's mother, sitting in her own kitchen, holding a cup of tea, not looking nervous for a single second. The palace spin required the public to believe that this composed, careful, 70-year-old woman who had said nothing publicly for 22 years, through genuinely difficult moments, had simply lost her mind and made things up. Nobody believed that, not even the people being paid to say they did. And then, the Annabelle Elliott problem arrived. Once journalists started pulling apart Carole's comments about certain individuals benefiting from royal connections, someone connected the dots. Annabelle Elliott, interior design, £4.2 million across 3 royal residences since 2016, Highgrove, Clarence House, Burke Hall. Suddenly, this was not a story about grandparenting philosophies or competing visions for the monarchy's future. This was a story about money, and money, unlike family dynamics, has paper trails that journalists are actually quite good at following. By March the 21st, 2025, exactly 1 week after the hello piece ran, the collapse was visible and specific. Annabelle Elliott's company website had been quietly taken offline. 2 of Camilla's planned public appearances at charitable events were postponed, citing scheduling conflicts. One of the palace's most reliable royal commentators publicly withdrew from a television panel discussion about the story, citing a conflict of interest, which honestly, that withdrawal alone told you more than the panel discussion ever would have. And King Charles canceled a private dinner that had been on the official calendar for 6 weeks. No explanation given, no rescheduled date offered. Now look at William's position through all of this. Because this is genuinely the most uncomfortable part of the whole story. He is privately furious not just at Camilla, but at the position his father has put him in. He cannot publicly defend his mother-in-law without openly challenging the institution he has spent his entire adult life preparing to lead. He cannot stay completely silent without appearing to abandon her. Every option available to him has a cost attached, and he knows that whatever he does or doesn't do is being watched and interpreted by everyone. She had spent 30 years outmaneuvering people who underestimated her. She had gone from the most hated woman in Britain to queen. That is genuinely not nothing. But William had never underestimated her, not once. And neither, it turned out, had Carole. And then Charles did something nobody predicted. March the 25th, 2025. King Charles did not release a statement defending Camilla. He did not call Carole and ask her to walk back her remarks. He did not hold a press conference, summon a spokesperson, or put out anything through the official palace communications team. He did not confirm the memorandum existed. He did not deny it. He did none of the things that Camilla's team had spent the previous week quietly hoping he would do. What he did was invite Carole Middleton, Michael Middleton, William, and Kate to a private lunch at Windsor Castle, just the 5 of them, and Camilla was not included. Now, here's what you need to understand about why that matters, because on the surface, it might just sound like a family lunch. People have lunch. Families get together. That's not automatically significant, but context is everything in the royal world, and the context here is this. In 22 years of Kate being connected to the royal family from the very first moment she appeared on the public radar as William's girlfriend Carole Middleton had been to Windsor Castle in a private, personal capacity exactly twice. This was the third time. And it happened the week after the most explosive interview anyone connected to the royal family had given in years, with Camilla conspicuously, undeniably absent from the guest list. Charles was not rescinding the memorandum with a signed document. He was not issuing a formal statement of clarification. He was doing what the royal family has always done when it wants to communicate something important without actually saying it out loud. He was sending a signal, and the signal was completely clear to everyone who needed to read it. No statement. No press conference. No drama. Charles just had lunch with his daughter-in-law's mother and didn't invite his wife. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Done. But then something happened that nobody had arranged and nobody could have planned. After the lunch, William and Carole were seen walking together on the Windsor estate grounds. Just the two of them. Talking. William, with his hands in his pockets, slightly hunched the way he gets when he is genuinely relaxed rather than performing relaxation for a camera. Carole with her arm through his. A member of the public caught it through the estate fence and shared it within 20 minutes. By that evening, it had run in every major British publication. And that image, unplanned, unmanaged, completely outside anyone's control, finished the story in a way that no official statement ever could have. Camilla's response to all of this, according to a source close to the palace, was described as very quiet. She attended no public engagements on the 25th or for the 4 days following. She sent Charles a handwritten note. The contents of that note are not known and will almost certainly never be made public. But the fact that she wrote a note rather than walking into a room and having a conversation, that specific detail tells you something important about where things actually stood. The formal advisory role was off the table. Permanently, irreversibly, without a single word said publicly by anyone. But what this whole story actually means for the monarchy, for William, for the future, that's the part that genuinely changes how you see everything that just happened. When you step back and look at the entire chain of events, all of it, from the memorandum to the Sandringham meeting to the photograph to the Windsor lunch, what you actually see is not a family dispute, not palace gossip, not two grandmothers arguing over birthday cake and school runs. What you see is the single most consequential transfer of informal power inside the British royal family since Diana died in 1997. Carole Middleton, a woman who held no title, no official position, no seat at any institutional table, just forced a sitting queen consort off the board, with an interview, in Hello magazine, without naming her directly, without saying a single legally actionable word, and without a single person inside the palace being able to do anything about it. That is not luck. That is not impulse. That is a 22-year strategy reaching its conclusion. Think about what Camilla actually lost here, because it goes well beyond the advisory role. She lost the 30-year reputation she had carefully, painstakingly built as someone who had earned her place through restraint and dedication. She lost the argument that she was above the kind of institutional politics that destroyed the previous generation. And most significantly, she lost the narrative. The story of Queen Camilla is no longer only the story of rehabilitation and hard-won acceptance. It is now also the story of a woman who tried to extend her reach into the next generation of royals and was stopped by a grandmother from Berkshire who had been watching her, quietly and without blinking, for 2 decades. And look at what Carole actually won. She protected her grandchildren from a dynamic she knew from personal, painful experience was capable of grinding people down. She established publicly and permanently that there is a limit to how far the institution's reach extends into the Wales family's private life. She did it without breaking any law, without burning any bridge she actually needed, and without making a single enemy she hadn't already made. The interview is on record. The Windsor lunch happened. The photograph exists. None of it can be undone. Now here's the part that honestly gets me every time I think about it. Diana spent the last years of her life fighting to maintain her influence over her own children, fighting an institution that wanted to manage her, isolate her, and gradually erase everything she represented from the monarchy's future. She lost that fight. She was gone before she could finish it. But the woman who watched Diana lose it, who was 42 years old on September the 6th, 1997, who understood the pattern from the very first moment she saw it playing out again, just won it. 28 years later, quietly, at a lunch table at Windsor Castle, and William watched all of it. He watched his father choose 2 months of silence over transparency with his own son. He watched Carole do in 6 weeks what 22 years of palace protocol could not. When William becomes king, and he will become king, he will remember every detail of this moment. Not as an anecdote. As a lesson, she waited 22 years to say one thing. And apparently that was exactly long enough.